Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best mid laners for patch 6.16. So first up is going to be Gangplank. Right now, Gangplank is tearing up solo queue for both the top and the mid lane. He's probably one of the best scaling champions in the game because once you get a few items on Gangplank, once you get your core items of like Trinity Force, once you get Infinity Edge and then like Youmuu's, he does so much damage in team fights. And I want to say when you're playing Gangplank, you usually out damage everybody else on your team. If you don't do that, then you're probably playing him wrong or you're not getting your barrel combos off in team fights. And because he can just deal so much damage in late game team fights, you can just carry so hard with him. He also does provide pretty good crowd control in team fights with his barrels and his ultimate. His ultimate is a great ability as well for just helping your team out if they aren't doing too well in the laning phase. If you see your bot lane fighting and they're losing the fight, you can sauce your ult down bot lane and help them out. Or if you do see the enemy bot lane champions getting away with very low HP, then you can throw your ult down there and get a kill sometimes if you're lucky. He also doesn't really have any too hard lane matchups right now in the mid lane. If he is in a harder matchup, then he can just sit back, farm with his Q and farm with his barrels. And a few cons to GP are that his barrel mechanics are definitely hard to get used to at first, but once you do get them down, he's a very strong champion. And he is also a fairly easy gank target in the early game. He does not have a gap closer, so when you are playing GP, if you are going to be pushing out like with your barrels and trying to push the enemy into their tower, then just make sure you do ward so you don't fall behind in the early game. Next up is Anivia. So Anivia is a really strong champion pretty much at all stages of the game right now. She does have very high base damage on all of her abilities, which allows her to go for that build of like tier into rod, and you still deal so much damage with basically having very minimal AP in the early game. Your ult E combo can chunk the enemy squishy down to half HP, and if you do follow up with like your Q, or if you can hit your Q first and go for the RE after that, you're gonna chunk them to below half HP, which is just really insane. She does have great AoE damage with her ultimate and her Q, and her wave clear is probably some of the best for any mid lane champion with her ult and her Q as well. She does have really good kite in teamfight. She's got the slow with her ultimate, the stun with her Q, and then she also does have her wall, which if used correctly can be a very game-changing ability. It's kind of like an easier to use Talia ultimate in a sense, because if the enemies are taking, or if you're taking Dragon or Baron, and you do have your wall at like max rank, then you can completely block off the enemies from getting to the Baron pit or to the Dragon pit, and that could just allow you to easily secure that objective. She is also very hard to kill and very annoying to play against because of her passive. You just never know whether or not you should target Anivia in a team fight, because if she's got her passive up and she's also got like Zhonya's, then she's gonna stay alive for a really long time. And I just always hate, like if I'm playing an assassin against Anivia and I'm not sure if her passive's up, I go for an all-in on her, her passive pops, and then I just end up dying because I go too deep for the kill. So her passive is definitely a very strong part of her kit. A few cons to Anivia are that she does not have a gap closer, and she also is somewhat harder to play than other mid lane champions. Her Q is a slow moving projectile, so it can be a little bit hard to hit if you are new on her, and her wall can definitely work against you in some situations. If you're not very confident on your Anivia, then you could end up walling one of your teammates off and just having them die, and that could end up losing you the game. So she isn't the easiest mid lane champion, that's for sure. Next up, I have Kenan. So unlike Anivia, I think that Kenan is actually one of the easier mid lane champions. Your main objective when you are playing as Kenan is to look for that flash ult engage in a mid to late game team fight. If you can do that successfully with Kenan and get your ultimate off on like 2 or 3 targets or on the high priority targets, then your likelihood of winning as Kenan is going to be very high. We are in a pretty squishy meta right now. We're really not seeing too many tanks being played, maybe other than in the jungle. So Kenan just does really well in this meta, because if he can get like a few squishy targets in his ultimate, he can single-handedly carry a team fight. He also is a pretty strong laning champion. He really doesn't have any too hard matchups in the laning phase. If he is in a harder matchup, then he can just farm with his Q. He does have good mobility with his E as well, so it makes it very hard to gank a Kenan in the early game. If you are like jungling and you're going up against a Kenan, then you're probably not going to be able to get a kill on him in the laning phase as long as his E is off cooldown. And his flash engage in a late game team fight can single-handedly win your team the game. Now, a few cons to Kenan are that he is weaker if the enemy team does have a good disengage comp. So if they do lock like a Gragas jungle or a Janna support, then picking Kenan in that situation is probably not the best idea. And he is also weak when his ultimate is on cooldown. So I would not recommend like fighting unless you do have your ultimate up. Make sure you let your team know the cooldown of your ultimate and only try to fight when it is active. Making her way back onto the list for this patch is Ahri. So Ahri is really strong right now in this meta in my opinion because it is a fairly squishy meta. We really aren't seeing too many tanks being played, and Ahri does thrive in those squishy metas because it just allows her to dash in with her ultimate, charm the target, and because that target is most likely going to be squishy, then you're going to be able to burst them down really quickly and just go for objectives after you do burst that target down. You could even end up winning the game if it is late game. So because Ahri does have like really good pick potential with her charm, and because she can burst down those like squishy supports that are being played right now and the squishy mid laners and top laners, I think that she's a great pick for this patch. She does have great mobility too with her ultimate. Her ultimate provides 3 flashes, and then she also does have her summoner spell, which is going to be a flash. So she has 4 flashes in her kit, which just makes her really hard to catch, and it just allows her to rarely die when you are playing as Ahri. I found that I only die maybe like 2 or 3 times in a game as Ahri, and you really shouldn't be dying more than that if you are playing her correctly. She does have a really good roaming kit because of her ultimate and due to her charm. If you do get ahead in the laning phase, or if you do shove the enemy under tower, then be sure to look to go for roams because your roaming potential is definitely very good. She is a pretty safe laning champion because if she is in a harder matchup, then she can just sit back and farm with her Q. And she does have a great level 6 all-in. If you play it correctly and you can hit that charm on the opponent once you do have level 6, if you do have your ignite up and your ultimate up, then you should be able to pick up the kill as long as they are like a squishy mid lane champion, someone like a Lux or someone like a Katarina. As long as they're not building like any health, then you should be able to burst them down really easily. And a few cons to Ahri are that she is very skill shot reliant, or she is more skill shot reliant than some of the other mid lane champions due to her charm and her Q. And her damage is pretty weak if you do fall behind with her. She is still somewhat useful though if you fall behind because you do have your charm, which can completely change a game if you can get that off on a priority target. But her damage is definitely lacking unless you do have your items. And to round out this top 5, I have Velkoz. So Velkoz is, in my opinion, the best mid lane champion right now. He's even started to see some play in the LCS, which I am pretty happy about because Velkoz has been a great pick for these past few patches, and because like a Zigz being nerfed and Victor isn't as popular anymore, Velkoz is starting to see more play, and people are finally starting to realize how strong this champion actually is. The amount of AoE damage you can pump out in teamfights as Velkoz is insane, and he also does really well if the enemy team does have a tankier comp too, because he does have true damage with his passive, so you can easily shred tanks. Like with a full combo in a teamfight, you can actually like 100-0 a tank champion, which is pretty insane. He does have pretty good CC in his kit with his Q and his E, and his laning phase is great as well because he does outrange a lot of the other mid lane champions. So for example, a Victor, a Twisted Fate, a Veigar, an Annie, all of those champions are shorter ranged and they don't match the range of Velkoz's Q. So therefore, if they try to go for damage on Velkoz or they try to trade with him, Velkoz can throw his Q out, he can easily line up an E after that because they're slowed, and then he pops his ultimate and he 100-0s them right there. So because of that combo, he's just a really strong laning champion and he's so hard to deal with. He is also a longer range mid lane champion, which does make him a great pick in the laning phase. He does have the long range with his Q and his ultimate, and in my opinion, he does have one of the smoother auto attack animations, which does make it pretty easy to CS with him. And a few cons to Velkoz are that he does not have a gap closer, and he is also very skill shot reliant. He does have a skill shot in every single one of his abilities, so if skill shot champions aren't up your alley, then Velkoz probably isn't going to be the best champion for you. So first on the honorable mentions, I have Victor. Now Victor did get a nerf this patch to his ultimate to where it does not move around as fast as it did before. I still think that he is a great pick in the mid lane, and he is definitely still one of the best mid lane champions, but I feel like right now Anivia just kind of does what Victor does, but a little bit better. Anivia does provide really good burst damage, she does provide great wave clear as well with her ultimate and her Q, and she does also provide a little bit better crowd control in team fights because of the slow from her ultimate and the stun from her Q. So I think that if you can play a good Victor and you can play a good Anivia as well, then I would lean more towards Anivia for this patch because Victor has been nerfed recently. Next up is Zigz. So I've been playing Zigz a lot this last patch. I think I've played around 15 games on him, and I won 12 out of those 15 games at least. I think that he's a great pick right now because of this new First Blood tower thing that they introduced last patch. Zigz is one of the best tower pushing mid lane champions because of his passive and because of his W, as well as the fact that he does have good wave clear. So if the enemy champion does try to roam in the laning phase, it's so easy for you to get that First Blood tower with Zigz, and I find myself getting that First Blood tower pretty much every second game as him, and I just snowball out of control. Once you do get a few items on Zigz, then your team fight becomes insane. All of your abilities are AoE abilities, so if you can hit those in team fights, then you're going to deal a load of damage. And once you do get to a late game team fight, you only need to hit that one good ultimate on a few squishy targets to end up winning your team the game. Next up is Cassiopeia. So Cassiopeia is one of the best mid laners if she can be played correctly. She does have an insane win rate if you do have like over 120 games on the champion. If you don't have a lot of games on her though, then her win rate is pretty average and it's not too good. So if you want to take the time to learn this champion, get her kit down, know how to play her, then she's definitely a great pick and she can carry extremely hard. Next is Twisted Fate. So Twisted Fate is also a little bit harder in my opinion. He does rely on getting a good snowball going in the early game to be most successful, and if you can't find those good ultimates in the laning phase once you do hit level 6, then you aren't going to be as useful as some of the other mid lane champions. So whenever your ultimate is off cooldown, look to be using that and look to try to get a snowball going. Next up, I have Annie. So Annie is a very simple mid lane champion. If you're new to mid or you just want to play an easy mid lane pick, then I would pick up Annie for sure. She does have a very simple burst combo and a very effective burst combo. If you can get some good flash stun tibbers off in team fights, then you're definitely going to do very well on the champion. And lastly, on the honorable mentions, I have Brand. So Brand is a pretty solid pick right now for this patch. Next patch, he is getting some nice buffs to his ultimate. His ultimate's AP ratio is getting increased as well as the base damage on it. So if you want to play Brand this patch, I would definitely recommend it. But for next patch, if I don't end up doing a tier list for mid lane for some reason, then definitely look to pick up Brand in 6.17 because I think he's going to be a very strong pick. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. If you did enjoy, then please be sure to leave a like. Subscribe if you guys have not already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you guys in my next video.